We were there right where Round was, and where he fell through, well, he almost fell completely through, 97 feet or 93 feet down to the rotunda floor. It's still meshed over with chicken wire, and you have to be very careful where you walk up there, just as
scary.
Just as wrong. And you have to climb up over a picket wrought iron round fence and such. But it was really a thing to behold. And the way they had it scenario. By the way, the chief signal officer from Fort Gordon and his staff flew up for the occasion, and we had the 11th North Carolina band playing. And the way they climaxed the event was they at a certain time a lone rider came down the street, because all streets intersect there at the Capitol in Raleigh. He came galloping down the street, and you could hear the hooves hitting the pavement blocks and such, and you could hear it getting closer and closer. And he yelled up something to the effect, "The war's over! The war's over! Johnston has surrendered!" And shortly thereafter, we sent up the signal rocket. It was nice. It worked. And you see, here again, it's the marriage of those who do the research and those who do the recreating. Most of the folks that are in the association are not reenactors. Most are researchers, and they're avid, interested folks. But we have the means now to actually demonstrate. And when we were invited down to the 130th Signal Ball at Augusta, Georgia, the highlight of the whole night. By the way, Steve Simpson is just he's dynamic. He made up a skit with about 3 different scenes. He worked up the music. He sent things down to Augusta. When we got there, they had the script. They had studied it for a few weeks. They brought the band in. They had singers and so on. And what the highlight of the whole night was at night. The last scene was supposed to be someone signaling. They brought out Alexander, and he was signaling. And we couldn't use fire, so we used this piece of cellophane with some color inside, and they'd shown a spotlight on it. But they had the fellow waving the torch back and forth, and the chorus was singing the Confederate signal song, where it says, "But we're on watch with the bonny white flag that bears the crimson square." And they talked about when all the army is fast asleep, but who's on watch with the bonny white flag? And of course the torch, it mentions the torch in there, the glittering meteor of the torch.
Are you going to say some more about that manual?
Yes, I was.
Do you need a copy?
Well, I'd be happy to have one for my file.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
But I might have wondered, for example, why the type was rather imperfect in that copy. It was printed on a little press that Sue had in its office. It was a pretty amateurish job. Meyer finished it after he had gotten fired as chief signal officer. He was temporarily out in Cairo, Illinois on assignment. And he finished it then what had started earlier. And he wrote his wife or somebody, I've forgotten now, just who, it was an abbreviated manual because of essentially the circumstances under which it was written. And and he promised to do a more complete one at a later date. And indeed he did. It was republished in a much larger edition. That is to say, there was a much larger edition published in 1866, which was essentially the edition then that was improved upon and went through several different editions down to, I think, as late as 1879. Several of those editions were published by Van Nostrand, D. Van Nostrand, which was a scientific and technical publisher in New Jersey that then. And then the last edition, at least, was published by it would be a lot more meaningful to anybody who looked at it and used it if they knew something about how it was done. It was I think it was printed by Simeon White, who was a clerk in the signal officer, who stayed in the signal office until about 1890. I think he retired quite some time later. Anyway,
I had a question.
It has an interesting history, and
one question about Simeon's press. Do you think when Nicodemus was relieved for publishing his report before the secretary approved it, I remember reading somewhere that Stanton also confiscated the press. Do you think it may have been the same exact press that was used?
Could have been, but I don't know.
That would be interesting. And where is that press?
Yeah.
Another story, another time.
Might be something else.
After the war, as much as the Army wanted to preserve things, for instance, the quartermaster in 1866, if I'm not mistaken, took one of every item at the Schuylkill Arsenal in Philadelphia and preserved it. And now, of course, it's I think in the Smithsonian collection. I've heard through bits and pieces of what I could get out of the various histories that a signal kit was given to the War Department Museum, wherever that was. I'm not quite sure. And however that may have gotten broken up and dispersed, I'm not aware of either. But no one seems to know where there is an extant signal torch. Fort Gordon doesn't know. Fort Monmouth doesn't know. The Smithsonian folks, I forget the fellow's name. There's a later torch at Fort Meade that has an end fill cap at the very end, but nothing on the side.
Ellen Phillips was the director of the Signal Corps Museum when it was at Fort Monmouth. Had one made.
Yes.
I don't think she ever had about that.
Well, if that's the one that got transferred down to Fort Gordon,
that's probably the one. And my recollection is that she had one made. Although she had. She was financially pretty well off, and she bought a lot of things for the museum.
Did she buy the Beardsley electromagnetotelegraph?
I don't know whether she did or not. I don't remember whether she had one or not. There's one in the Smithsonian, and
they actually own three.
What's her name? Let's call her.
And there was one at Fredericksburg, which was on permanent loan from the Smithsonian.
Yes.
And you say there was a third one. I don't know about that.
There's one at Fort Gordon. It's missing the bell, the
Is it
call-up
Fort
bell.
Gordon?
Yes.
I'd forgotten that.
Now, in our files we
well,
have.
she must have had that then. She probably bought it. She dealt with these.
This was done
military,
in the 50s or so. Bannerman was still in business, and they still had some of these things available.
I think she bought a lot of things from Bannerman. I forgot about Bannerman.
And I hear that there's still things out there on Bannerman's Island that, like, they had piles of things that they just covered over and such. But that's like the buried treasure. Yeah, included in our archives and Signal Corps Association's archives are the manuals of how to work the Beardsley electromagnetotelegraph. One of the things here that we can give you, I wish we could give you everything, and you're more than welcome to get together with us.
And this too. Tell them that.
Oh yes.
My materials are eventually going to go up to Carlisle to the Military History Research Collection up there.
Carlisle?
I don't know if you know about it or not, but the Army has a major research facility at Carlisle. It used to be under what's now the Center of Military History, but it was separated some years ago and is now under the Army War College. And they have a major, they have a fine library. It's in the old War College building. A lot of the military history materials in the library, and then they've been assiduously collecting for years the papers of Civil War. For example, they've got a number of things, Civil War, Signal Corpsmen, and they such things as questionnaires that they sent out, filled out by Spanish-American War veterans. And it's a major research facility. The theory of the thing was that they would accession things that of military history importance to the military history of the Army that were not of sufficient importance that they might wind up in the Library of Congress, for example. But I think they've accessioned a lot of things, gotten a lot of things that otherwise probably would have gone to the Library of Congress. Anyways, and Summers is the archivist because he's a Civil War.
Richard Summers?
Richard Dick Summers. He's a Civil War specialist himself.
He came to my
But
room.
their collection includes material from all periods of military history of the Army.
Dr. Summers gave us a bibliography
Yes.
that we've been able to use. Speaking of getting back to
and
the
that's
Beardsley.
where my Myers stuff's going to go.
Alrighty. I hope perhaps one of these days that.
Yeah, I have a copy of this.
Oh, well then you're aware that Gustav Estena, the signal officer that was down on Hilton Head.
I think this is the one I have. So go ahead.
Disproved a lot of the historians and the rehashers of bad history that the Beardsley electromagnetotelegraph machine was usable. It was a good machine, but like any other piece of delicate instrument, it had to be kept in calibration. It had to be adjusted occasionally. And Dana, in fact, says that in his recollections here, which are edited by Mr. Swift. Yes.
Swift had me speak to the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable
Oh.
at the time. I haven't heard from him since.
He's
Yeah.
passed away.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yes, and his daughter-in-law, Anita,
Anita.
has sent us a bunch of information on him, which also includes things that we'd probably like to get down to the Surratt Society on the Lincoln Honor Guard, which Lieutenant Dana became a member of when there were attempts to take the body of President Lincoln.
Is this an extra copy?
Yes, that's yours.
I'd be glad to keep it.
Well, good, and if you
I
don't
think I
have it-
have a copy, but
But if you don't, you do.
No,
That's right.
I have one. The Beardsley machine was full of problems. As you say, it would get out of synchronization. You might crank an A out and get an F or something at the other end of the line, and then dirt and sand stuff always tend to get in the magneto and the gears and not make it work very well, I guess. And soldiers who'd never seen such a thing before thought that would pieces of it make good pipe stems, so they were always cutting out pieces of it.
Or souvenirs from home.
Souvenirs.
Or a dastardly Confederate machine.
It had the advantage of being simple to operate. Any literate soldier who knew the alphabet could be taught to run it.
What about its